Today's episode of the Ramp It Up podcast contains explicit language and may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener's discretion is advised. Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Ramp It Up podcast with your host, Ronel Sinuis.
Are you ready to ramp it up?
Ramp it up, ew!
Hey, yo, ramp it up, B.
Girl, ramp it up! Ramp it up!
The Ramp It Up podcast.
Hey, you need to ramp it up.
Ramp it up.
And we are back with another episode of the Ramp It Up podcast. I'm your host and your favorite Zoe on Wheels, Ronel. Second episode of the month. We actually have, I think, three scheduled for the month of May. We are getting it in on this first half of 2022. We just celebrated Mother's Day. Shout out to Tatiana, who joined us for our Mother's Day episode of the podcast. And the month of May is really busy, really busy, actually. If you guys don't know, month of May has, well, now they celebrate May the 4th. It's a Star Wars themed holiday. And we also had Cinco de Mayo for those of Mexican heritage. Mother's Day, of course. We had Nurses Appreciation Week from May the 6th, ending on the May 12th, which is Florence Nightingale's birthday. Shout out to all the nurses out there, registered, licensed, certified, or practitioners. Shout out to all of our nurses out there. May is also celebrated as Mental Health Awareness Month, Haitian Cultural Month, Haitian Flag Day being on May 18th. There's a whole lot of things being celebrated. There's even more. I checked the calendar, and there's literally like 6 to 10 things per day of May. I'll actually just put it in the show notes just so you can guys kind of take a gander on how many days are being observed in the month of May. It's ridiculous. It's a whole lot out there, but they're all important. And shout out to everyone. But just the ones we talked about, we're going to be focusing on one in particular on today's episode. May 19th is GAAD. What is GAAD? It is Global Accessibility Awareness Day, where we are bringing attention to accessibility for a person who has mobility issues. Accessibility is very important. We don't live in a very accessible world, and GAAD specifies mostly on web and digital accessibility for people who are trying to access the internet, devices, apps, all electronic documents. It specifies there. But accessibility goes in all aspects of life. If someone can't use it, if it's not universally usable or accessible for someone, then it can't be accessible. And I'm talking about people with mobility issues, with vision or hearing impairments, with cognitive or learning disabilities, for those who are elderly, for those who may be of smaller stature or even taller stature, whatever may be, accessibility should be a universal thing. And Global Accessibility Awareness Day talks all about it. Again, with the focus mostly on digital, web, and electronic accessibility. Speaking of it, we actually have a guest joining us for today's episode. She goes by the name of Madison Russell. Madison and I met through the United Spinal and the Tech Access group, and I found out she has an interest in web accessibility, digital accessibility, which I have just started diving into myself career-wise, and we clicked and we started sharing some information, especially since we're both in the Tech Access group, which focuses a lot on technology for those who have mobility and other impairments, just making sure it's accessible for us also. We get to have a great conversation. We talk about herself, and she's actually a super interesting person. Not only is she a Rochester Institute of Technology graduate, she's an athlete, she's a wheelchair user, she is a dancer, she's an advocate, she's a bit of a tech nerd, which I say with the utmost respect because I am as well. She's a gamer, and she's just an all-around great person. So we have a great conversation where we talk about herself, her journeys, her struggles, and her future aspirations in her career in technology, specifically accessibility. So stay tuned for the conversation that I have with Madison Russell, and of course, talking about Global Accessibility Awareness Day. On today's episode of the Ramp It Up podcast, I'm being joined by Madison Russell. We actually met through United Spinal, specifically the Tech Access Group. So, Madison, say hello to everybody.
Hi.
Thanks so much for joining me. I know it's been super busy. You're in school and you just graduated and you had a lot coming out. So, thank you very much for making time to join me in the podcast.
Of course.
Now, we have Global Accessibility Awareness Day coming up, aka GAAD, on May 19th, and you and I have had a lot of conversations about digital accessibility when it comes to people with disabilities in the digital and online spaces, and I figured, hey, it'd be a great time for us not only to talk about that, but just to get to know you a bit better. So I'm going to share a bit about Madison. She's a recent graduate from the Rochester Institute of Technology in New York with a degree in human-centered computing, focusing on digital accessibility. She's a published accessibility researcher. She's a member of the United Spinal Tech Access Group and currently works for Elsevier as a digital accessibility intern. Outside of tech, she's a dancer and competitive hand cyclist. How do you have time for it all, Madison?
I have no idea.
That was a lot. That's a whole lot to get done. So I think it sounds great, but outside of what we just read, I just want to know more about you, get to know you a bit more, and so tell me who Madison is.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in a suburb outside of Atlanta, Georgia. I kind of always knew I was going to go into something tech related. My dad was a software engineer, and so it's kind of in the blood. My grandfather was a systems engineer for IBM.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, I knew kind of what I was going to do. But with my disability, I started having trouble walking when I was 17, my senior year of high school. I had a pre-existing condition, juvenile arthritis. So they just kind of said, oh, must be that, you're fine. And then I became a wheelchair user at 18, having significant problems walking. And by the time I was 19, I couldn't walk at all. I convinced a doctor to give me an MRI, and they found a massive cyst in my spinal cord that had damaged the center of the cord and some of the outside of the spinal cord. So I was diagnosed as an incomplete T5 paraplegic from that. And yeah, that's been since my diagnosis 2.5 years, I think. So I'm still new to it. I'm 22, so I've been in a wheelchair for 4 years. Pretty new to it, but I connected with United Spinal pretty much immediately after my diagnosis, which definitely helped a lot, having that kind of community around me. I decided to go into accessibility actually when I was 15, before I was a wheelchair user. So I kind of consider it fate that happened. I knew when I was 15 exactly what I wanted to do and exactly what school I wanted to go to. I did early admission, didn't apply to anything else, just the one. I knew I wanted to do accessibility, and then maybe 6 months after I was admitted, or I was accepted to RIT, is when I started having trouble walking. So I kind of consider it fate that happened in the timing that it did. But yeah, so that's kind of how I got into accessibility in the first place.
So now you're at 15, jumping into something that I found out about at 33. That's ridiculous for one. Of course, as technology advanced, but how did accessibility even come to the forefront of your mind or to your attention at all? I understand that you have literally generational tech in front of you and it's in your blood, but what aspect of accessibility was brought to your attention?
Yeah, I knew I was involved with the disability community, having arthritis since I was a kid. And I went to a special summer camp for disabled kids. And so I kind of saw people using this technology, different Sip and Puffs, things like that. And I followed a lot of disabled creators on YouTube and Instagram. And so I kind of saw the tech they were using and saw that there was a big gap in accessibility and what people had access to, and what I remember one of the big things was the Fortnite whole thing with deaf players weren't able to play Fortnite without the visual audio. And so I remember like that being a big thing. And I don't really know how exactly I decided on accessibility. It was just something that one day I was like, I'm gonna do this. I was in the Girls Who Code program, which is a program I was in the very beginning of it, that provides an entire summer of coding experience and instruction for high school girls. So it starts in the 9th grade, the summer immersion program. They actually put you in a company. So I was with Accenture in downtown Atlanta. And after I finished the Girls Who Code program, I applied for an award with the National Center for Women in Information Technology. And I did a paper writing about the ways that The Sims 4 could become more accessible. So how that game could implement visual audio and things that Fortnite was doing. And I won state winner and national honorable mention for that. And I think that kind of cemented for me that, yeah, this is something I can do. I'm good at it. I like it. Other people like what I'm doing. So yeah, I just kind of consider it one of those universe things where one day I just said, I want to do this. And then it ended up affecting me personally.
Yeah, that's crazy. I'm going to say low key, I'm hating on you. You're making me realize, dang, I'm old. Like, you're easily the youngest guest I've had on the podcast so far. And a lot of the conversations I've had with some of the other wheelchair users, they talk about the assistive devices, that how they've evolved in the last 20, 15 years. And I don't want to say lucky. Lucky is not the word, but I have to say you and I have become wheelchair users at a more fortunate time when a lot of these technologies have, I won't say reached their peak, but have evolved at least to a point where a lot of us have been able to communicate and get back to work and get back to school a lot easier than many others have had to. But I'm hating more so because you're in that generation where coding was being taught in school. Like, I was learning HTML. Like, we were coding there. Like, that's the big difference from what you were doing or what I'm doing or what I was doing in the high school. But it's amazing not only the programs that they're having for the younger people, but especially for women, how they're really pushing young girls to get into tech and different ethnic groups and parties as well. So it's amazing that you're able to get there early and find your niche at an early point. So that's amazing.
Yeah, the state of Georgia requires that coding is taught beginning in elementary school now.
Ridiculous.
I know they changed it. I want to say maybe like 8 or 9 years ago. That was signed in. So I think they even start in like kindergarten or first grade, just doing kind of building block coding, and learning how to make something move in like Scratch or Alice or something like that. But yeah, so I got lucky that my high school had coding classes. I was actually put in it accidentally. I wasn't supposed to be in that class. But my 9th grade coding class is kind of what pushed me to explore more with Girls Who Code. So it's really good. I know other states have similar programs, kind of making sure that especially women and people of color are being included in coding instruction.
I took a very I can't even say beginners, like what's before beginners course in coding, like during like the height of the pandemic when everyone was home bored, and I was like, oh, it's finally my chance to do this. Nope. By the 3rd week, I was like, yep, not into this. It's way too complex right now. Not to say I couldn't do it, but I realized, man, the leg up that everyone else has at this point, I'm cool. I'm gonna stick to journalism and media. That's what I'm good at, so I'm gonna keep going in that direction.
Yeah, coding is definitely interesting. I think I feel like I have the like genetics for it.
All of you. I'll stick to just enjoying what people like you make. There we go. Now you talked a bit about gaming, and I know gaming is a big thing. Like I was a big time gamer prior to my injury, and we've talked about it during the Tech Talks and throughout Tech Access Group. But I mean, in your opinion, what can and I know we're kind of jumping the gun here, but since you spoke about Fortnite, like, what can be done to make some more of these games more accessible?
Yeah, visual audio has really like changed a lot of games. I think Dead by Daylight has it now, maybe. I know the Fortnite one kind of changed everything because there's a young girl, and I don't remember her name, but she's a competitive Fortnite player who's deaf, and I know like she was part of the push to get visual audio. Another thing with gaming is customizing controls. I think that's something that everybody can do and should do, and it's not being done. Like with the Xbox adaptive controls and stuff, you need to map it to certain controls. Like even in these different games, they're different. And they it's something that's so easy to do, and companies aren't. I'm seeing more and more companies doing it, but having also audio description. I know I've met a couple blind gamers who rely on what little vision they have left, because not wheelchairs video games are not accessible at all for blind users. So that's another thing that a lot of games, especially story type games, could have audio description, and many of them don't. So it's another thing that I think a lot of, especially big companies, should be doing, and they're not doing.
I know we talked about it. I talked to Paul Amadeus Lane a lot because he's involved in making games more accessible. But like, I went from playing Call of Duty and Modern Warfare and sports games to now being forced to play single turn games on my phone, like word games and little puzzles. It's like, no, I want to be able to get back into gaming, and because of my level of function, one, I don't really want to use a quad stick where I'm doing everything by mouth, and there was a way to like combine one-handed joystick where I don't have to mash buttons, and like something with a headless mouse or something. I'd be able to jump right back in, and those are just some of the innovations that we would love to see in gaming that would make them, at least for people with mobility disabilities. But I'm not too versed in audio, visual, and even cognitive. But those are the things that I definitely want to see, like more prototypes where they're testing them out with people who have those different needs, instead of just giving us the one and like, hey, work with it, because they're also super expensive because of the few options that are out there.
Yeah, I know like Able Gamers is an amazing organization that's helping provide accessible controls to disabled gamers, but it's just so expensive. And I know like there's been a lot of push recently to have like easy mode and sandbox functions in a lot of games. Especially for people with cognitive disabilities who may be unable to play the game at like the default mode, but having an easy mode or a sandbox mode would make it more accessible. So there's so many things within gaming accessibility that can be done that just aren't across the board with all disabilities.
All right, we're going to put the accessibility to the side for just a second, so I can ask you a bit more about yourself. So can you tell me a bit of how you were able to adapt from, especially at a young age, you're 17, going from having some of the issues with arthritis to now becoming a wheelchair user?
Yeah, it was, I always say that I forced myself into acceptance when I didn't go through the other stages of grief. And now, 3-4 years later, that's kind of what I'm dealing with now. I think something that helped a lot was that it happened. I started using a wheelchair this summer between my senior year of high school and my freshman year of college. So I entered college as a wheelchair user, which I think made things a lot easier socially, because I wasn't constantly explaining to somebody why I'm now in a wheelchair and I wasn't before. Because even that's frustrating. I'm staying with my parents right now in my hometown, and I'll go to the grocery store and see somebody that knew me in high school, and they go, "Oh my God, what happened?" And I'm like, I don't want to do this in the middle of the produce section of the grocery store. So, it's, I think that was definitely part of it being easier. I also knew wheelchair users already, so I kind of knew that, options were out there for whatever I wanted to do, and that it wasn't the end of the world. It it was a rough transition. And, I had to learn how to drive with hand controls too, and had to learn how to advocate for myself with accessibility, which is not something I really did before. And it's just, I don't know, I think I had an easier time than others. I think partially because my injury was non-traumatic. So it happened kind of over time. And so it gave me a little more time to come to terms with it and kind of, I still feel like I forced myself into acceptance. And I kind of forced myself into, this is great. My life isn't over. I can still do whatever I want, to now, kind of seeing the reality of it, years later. But I have amazing friends, and we met our freshman year of college, and now we're graduated and still friends. And they have been really great about advocating for me and helping me with, they did like a zip lining thing at my school with like a portable zip line in the parking lot, and like my friends helped me get up the steps for it and things like that. We just recently went to Salem, Massachusetts, and they had to help me over every like cobblestone and every curb that didn't have a ramp. But it was a transition, definitely, and I'm still kind of dealing with coming to terms with it and understanding what the future is. But I think being the age that I was and at an already transitional point in my life really helped kind of get that. So yeah, it's still something I am working on accepting, but I've adapted a lot to my life now. So.
And you brought up an interesting point, because whenever it's a traumatic injury, it's kind of instantaneous. Like it's overnight. Like, 1 second you're what people would call able-bodied, and the next you're dealing with some form of paralysis, or you're now a wheelchair user, versus a progression of what may be an illness or a condition or whatever it may be. So there's no worse or better or whatever. They're just different scenarios.
Yes, absolutely.
I know for me, a big part of it was, of course, I had to get therapy, not only physical and occupational, but I had to sit down with a psychologist to talk about it, because like you said, it's a traumatic, not only physically but mentally. So did you have any therapy along those lines to kind of help you deal with it, or is it just, like you said, you just forced yourself through to the acceptance?
I definitely have had I saw one therapist right around the time of my diagnosis, and I ended up leaving her because every time I said I was disabled, she said, "Oh, don't call yourself that." And I was like, and it felt like she was pitying me rather than telling me to get off my butt and do something, And so I then found a new therapist who I just had to leave because she was in New York, but she helped me a lot kind of understand that, being disabled means that you're facing, and especially a wheelchair user, you're facing microaggressions every day. And it's something that I'm not even thinking about most of the time, but it still affects you mentally. My favorite story of that is in the Detroit airport. I went to a Subway to get food before my flight, and the cashier looked at me, points to the chair, and said, "Temporary or permanent?" And I was like, I'm just trying to get my food in the middle of the airport. Like I was.
Wait, no. This is a stranger.
Yep.
I don't know this person. You're just trying to get your sandwich, move on with life, and she points at your chair. Like, no preamble, no build up. Just
she didn't even say hi. She just pointed at it and said, "Temporary or permanent?" And I worked at a gym for the last year on campus, so I faced it a lot with people would go, "Did you break your leg?" And I'm like, "Do you see a cast? I'm like, what?" But I think therapy helped me a lot understand like kind of how to deal with that mentally, just having random people ask me about my medical info. And so I did also do some physical therapy as well, and occupational therapy, to kind of understand how to, I had an injury to my rotator cuff from using the wheelchair. So that was kind of one of those things we worked on, which is a common injury in wheelchair users. But yeah, I think I'm, I'm just now getting into, I'm a patient of the Shepherd Center, which is a spinal cord injury hospital in Atlanta. And I'm just starting to kind of understand. I felt like my disability, I was so focused on school that I wasn't paying attention really to my disability in the ways that I should have been. So it's kind of what I'm doing now is doing outpatient rehab, actually getting a chair fitted for me since I fitted my last one myself. And so kind of like that kind of stuff, getting different kinds of therapy definitely helps with that.
So, and for those listening to the episode, it's crazy how random people feel like they're entitled. They have a right to just ask whatever they feel like. And I was shocked. Like, I've heard stories, and until you experience it, like, oh no, people have the gall. Like, they'll ask you questions about your sexual abilities. Like, my friend, like, you don't know my last name. Like, why do you feel like you're entitled to this information? Or even because of your injury, they now have physical access to your body. Like, they'll touch you, and it's weird. And I've talked about it on other episodes where there's a really thin line between, should I educate this person or should I cuss them out because of what they just did? And, often in times or not, I tend to be on the educational side, but it's very hard not crossing that cussing you out line. And I'm sorry, that Subway lady, especially if my sandwich is already safe, I'd have cussed her out a little bit.
I had, like a week ago, like a week and a half ago, my last shift at my job at the gym, guy I had never seen before. He came up to the desk and asked to check out a piece of equipment. And so I transferred from a desk chair to my wheelchair. And he was like, oh, I totally didn't see that. And I was like, uh-huh. And then he started asking me like why I was in a wheelchair. And then he said, I'm just going to ask this. Can you feel your ass? And I was like, and I was trapped at work, so I couldn't even like say anything. I just went, uh-huh, bye. I'm like, I already gave you your equipment, so get away.
And it's like, why aren't you catching the awkward vibes I'm giving you? Like, this conversation's not going well.
Right. I was trying so hard to give him like the shortest answers possible. Like, he was like, why are you in a wheelchair? Got sick. And he was like, well, what does that mean? And I was like, got sick. I'm not going into this with you because I don't know you. And my disability is a little complicated to explain to a stranger. So, and it was so obvious to anybody else around that I was so uncomfortable with the situation, but he didn't care. And of course he did it while I was at work, so I couldn't even really do anything about it.
I was gonna say, I think one of the more awkward ones that I've had, and ironically it happens most often, but this time I was at the mall with my family members, and it just so happened, my cousin and I, we stopped, and she was sitting down, and we're chatting, and, she was kind of passing out flyers or whatever, and the young lady walks up to us, hands us her flyer, whatever she's trying to sell. She started talking to us, and you could already see she's visibly uncomfortable. I'm like, okay, whatever, I'm friendly. I usually get past that, so we're speaking about whatever she's selling, and in the middle of her pitch, she kind of stops and just says, okay, so what's wrong with you?
Yep.
And so my cousin was immediately gonna jump down her throat, and she's very protective, and her husband also has a spinal cord injury, so she's like, she's ready to disarm. And then I stopped her, and I looked her dead in the face, and I was just like, well, I was just born extremely, extremely handsome and debilitated, and then I guess because of how sarcastic I responded, she stopped and realized maybe she asked wrong.
Yeah.
And she's like, wait, I'm sorry. I was like, yes, that came out very wrong. And I just told her, look, I had a spinal cord injury. Like you said, like, look, dude, I don't need to give you my whole history, tell you all my medical stuff, but it's strange. It's this entitlement that people feel. And I don't know if it's just the awkwardness, but it's a person. Just speak, just say hello, and keep things moving.
Yep.
All right, so besides all these awkward interactions, and as you said, you're still kind of getting used to it, let's talk a bit about what you're doing, like socially, and outside of the school and the work. I know you do some stuff with the Rollettes. Mm-hmm. For those who may not know, can you tell us what the Rollettes are, who they are, and how you've gotten involved?
Yeah, so the Rollettes are a wheelchair dance troupe in Los Angeles, founded by Chelsea Hill, who's a good friend of mine. And they do a lot of performances in LA, and they've done performances in Italy and all across the country. They're really awesome. Part of why I think my disability was fate is because when I danced for 8 years, and then when I was 11, my arthritis got too bad in my knees and my hips, and it was too dangerous for me to continue dancing. So I had to quit. And then when I was 20, I realized that I don't have to worry about my hips and my knees anymore. So I can try dance again. And the Rollettes they started with Instagram live dance classes at the very beginning of COVID. And actually a year before that, in 2019, I had done a summer intensive dance thing with Full Radius. Full Radius is a physically integrated dance company based in Atlanta, and so they have a mixture of disabled and non-disabled dancers. So I did some stuff with them, and then I had a video of me with Full Radius go viral. It has, I think, 3 million hits across all platforms. And so that kind of showed me that I could dance and that I could be good at it. And then I started with the Rollettes, taking their classes in like April of 2020. And I continued dancing with them and taking private lessons from Chelsea Hill. And they do the Rollettes experience every year, which is a huge gathering of women in wheelchairs, kids and women in wheelchairs. And there's dance, there's speakers. I think Ali Stroker is speaking there this year. And they have makeup lessons for quads who want to learn how to do their own makeup and things like that. I've been there twice. I'll be there again in July. But dance is a huge part of my life now. And the reason is because I was able to start taking these dance classes because of COVID and realizing that I can dance again. And so that's kind of why I feel that my disability was kind of the universe fixing things, because I feel like I was meant to be a dancer and the arthritis stopped me from that. So the universe decided to give me another way to do it, is kind of how I feel about that. But outside of that, I'm just now connecting with wheelchair users. One thing I talk about a lot is my freshman year of college. I remember sitting in a room with all of my friends and realizing that none of them understand. They see what I do every day and they're with me and they help me, but they don't get it. Yeah. And I realized that I didn't know anybody who got it. And so that's what pushed me to take the class with Full Radius and to join United Spinal. And since then, I have met so many people in wheelchairs that are good friends of mine. And so that's changed a lot. I feel like I have people I can talk to about, something that my friends aren't going to understand. But outside of that, I do also do 5Ks, wheelchair racing, and I'm training for a marathon right now on a handcycle. We'll see if that pans out, but yeah, I think I'm joining some of the sports teams at the Shepherd Center as well, so that I can just meet more people in wheelchairs, because I think that's one of the most important ways that you can really heal mentally after becoming a wheelchair user, is meeting other people who are like you.
I think that brings me back to my very first question, where I asked you, how do you fit it all into your schedule? Like, that just sounds like so much activities.
It is. I try to be good at time management in my calendar. But I've always been very busy in high school. I was a stage manager and a technical director for musicals. So I was always busy doing that too. So I feel like I've always been just a really busy person. But yeah, I think, I try to make as much time as I can for dancing and working out, because those are things that help me in other aspects of my life. I feel better about myself. I have more energy. I can, participate more in other aspects of my life that aren't necessarily as fun.
No, and I just have to go back and because I resonated a lot with what you said, as far as, just building a community of people that know what you're going through. Like, I've been blessed with great family members and a core group of friends that they don't understand, and they don't pretend to understand, but they're always available, whether I, just want to hang out or if I'm in an emergency, like they help out. But, there's a connection that's not there because they just won't get certain aspects of it. And as I got involved with the spinal cord injury support group for Miami and Broward, and later on with United Spinal, like you built this community of people that just looking at you, they know what you're going through. They may not have the exact same situation, but there's someone in the room that understands the catheter problem, or they understand having transportation issues. They understand, man, I can't go out today because I have a pressure sore. So like, without saying it, sometimes like if I show up late today, they're like, man, I already know. There's an argument because you had to cancel at the last minute, and I think um, that has been very essential for me. Getting back to being social. I'm extremely extroverted. Like prior to my injury, I'm out and about, like leaving my house at 6 o'clock in the morning, coming back 2 o'clock in the morning because there's so much to do in the day. And getting injured kind of, I felt like that almost changed who I was because, for one, okay, having to get transferred, needing someone because I'm a higher level quad, so I need someone to help me with the Hoyer lift and make sure transportation set up. And I can only go to one place for that night and make sure transport, so there was a lot of limitations. So I felt like, man, some of the same people I used to hang out with, they don't understand those limitations. But when I started hanging out with other quads or paras or even the caregivers of people who understand, like who deal with it day to day, it made a huge difference. Not only that, let's be honest, like these are people you can talk to about bowel program, you can talk to them about catheterization, you can ask about fertility questions, and without feeling embarrassed. And that just changes, I think, not my perspective and how I feel, but just the fact that I no longer felt so isolated dealing with my injury.
Yeah, there's something that they always say with the Rollettes experience is that your life changes when you roll in a room and everybody's at eye level. I think that's so important. I was at the CSUN Assistive Technology conference back in March, and even going to something like that, it was an accessibility and assistive technology conference, but I was still short, and everybody else was so much taller than me. Even there were a couple wheelchair users that I knew that were there, but for the most part, even though it was for accessibility, it was mostly able-bodied people, or it was mostly people who could walk. And so going to the Rollettes experience and seeing everybody at eye level is amazing, and just kind of changes. I feel like for me it was a huge game changer. Like that's kind of the first time I went, it was like my life changed because I realized that the community exists and that all these people exist who get it. And like you said, you can talk to them about cathing or whatever else, and they understand. So I think that was big for me.
I think I can kind of equate that to being a black man. Like kind of a thing when you're walking into a room or just down the block, you happen to make eye contact with another black person, you just kind of give that "I see you" nod. And I think that's kind of where we're at now because, like, I went to the Renaissance Festival earlier this year, and anywhere we go, you kind of have to call ahead, make sure things are accessible, and you can get around. And it was outdoors, and I was going with some friends of mine. I was like, man, I want to make sure I'm comfortable and I'm not making it awkward for them. But while out there, I saw other wheelchair users, and like, okay, I see you. You kind of give each other the nod, and actually, it turns out I have a book bag, and it's from one of the guys here, and it's a brand that he started. And another wheelchair user kind of pulled up to me. He was like, "Hey," I was like, "Hey, I don't really know you," but he was like, and he showed me on the back of his chair. He had the sticker of the same brand, and it was just a connection that we made. We had no idea who each other were, but it's just that sense of camaraderie because of they have some sense of what you're going through, and you don't feel alone in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to just surround yourself with other people like you.
Dope stuff. Now, as you've now graduated, congratulations!
Thank you.
So many times, but what are some of your aspirations or your goals now for your career in accessibility or digital accessibility?
So I am actually currently looking at going back to school to get either my master's or a graduate certificate. But I'm going to be doing that while working. Right now, in about 3 weeks, I'll start my job with Elsevier, doing digital accessibility internship. And so that's kind of going to be my jumping off point because so many accessibility jobs require either, extensive experience or a master's. Unfortunately, a bachelor's degree isn't really enough anymore. But so, that internship will be kind of my jumping off point. I may stay with them long term. I might not. I'm not sure. I really want to do more remote work, just because I am very busy with other stuff. So I want something that's a little more flexible. But I definitely want to work in digital accessibility. I've been looking at getting my certification in assistive technology, which is like 1,000 hours of like work experience or something. It's ridiculous. But yeah, I'm looking at going back to school potentially, but also working, doing some kind of digital accessibility work with a company. I've applied for some things that are like testing. I know that's really big right now is accessibility testing consultants. Yeah. And that's something that they are more and more hiring disabled people for. So that it's not an able person trying to test this equipment or test this website and saying, yeah, it's accessible, and it's really not. So that's pretty cool. But I feel like I don't totally know what I'm going to do, but I'm 22, so I have a little bit of time.
Enjoy it.
Yeah.
That's what literally your 20s are for, like experimenting and trying out new things. In fact, that was one of the things that attracted me to when we first were in one of the Tech Access group meetings together, because I had literally just finished the EDX course, the beginner's course on web accessibility, and I was looking at the CPAC certification. So I was just like, oh, she's doing it too. All right. It'd be great for someone to talk to. And I plan on trying to take the exam in July. I just have to get my studying and stuff going on. But from there, I've done some testing through, I have a testing job right now, but it's more freelance than anything. And the cool thing about it is the career is evolving and it's growing. And like you said, they're quickly going to raise the qualifications. So one trying to get in, this is the time now to do so and find yourself a job if you're interested in going in the area. And what I really like about it is you don't have to have like this immense tech background. Like you really do not. And whatever you're learning on the go. And, I do have some, nowhere close to your 3 generations worth, but I have some background, especially having done HTML. So some insight, but it's a great, I just think it's a great thing, especially for, being in my 30s and having to recreate myself post-injury. Like you said, the universe finds a way to correct itself. It puts us in a position where, okay, certain doors may close, but others are opening themselves up.
Yeah, I definitely think, because my degree, I have a degree in human-centered computing, and so there's like 6 or 7 tracks you can go with it. There's like accessibility, instructional technology, design, front-end development, natural language processing, psychology. And so, there were a lot of different directions that I wanted to go, and when I started, I wasn't sure that I was going to do like just accessibility. I kind of thought that I would use it in some kind of development field, and then I realized that I don't like development. And I'm not big in programming at all, and so it's it's not for me. It's a whole foreign language. But so, I decided that I want to do only accessibility. Maybe in the last like 2 years since I worked, I did a co-op as a research assistant. So I helped on the paper that was published about graduate students and disability services. And then I also ran my own study on virtual reality gaming for wheelchair users. So
we're going to have to talk about that, because I'm very interested in VR.
Yeah, it was, the idea kind of came to me. I had a roommate who played, oh gosh, now I'm going to forget the name, Beat Saber. And the version he was playing on, you couldn't do from a wheelchair because you were needing to do turning and things like that while using your hands. And I remember him asking me if I wanted to turn, and then we kind of like looked at each other and realized that I couldn't. And so that's kind of what made me want to get more into VR and understand the accessibility of VR and what needs to be changed. I ran a pilot study looking at which VR devices wheelchair users are currently using, how it's working, and also if they could, would they want to use their smartwatch to control part of the game?
Okay.
So instead of having a controller that you grip, having one on your wrist so that you can still make
You just
turning
kind of move
movements.
it around and
Yeah. And so, unfortunately, I wasn't in the research lab long enough to do a full study, but it gave me a lot of really good insight on what needs to change and kind of what wheelchair users want, which was really fun. So I did really enjoy doing that. That was with the Center for Access and Inclusion Research at RIT, who they're doing so much amazing work in accessibility. And they have developed so many new technologies that are going on to hit the market. So they were really awesome.
I'm a bit of a Japanese anime geek, and many of the new isekai, or it's a genre where essentially you're getting trapped in games or whatever, a new world, and I'm like, so many of them have this like the full dive VR game. I'm like, man, I can't wait till something like that comes out. I won't have to worry about using hand controls or something like that. Just in the virtual world itself. So once that comes up, give me a call. I'll test those out for you.
Yeah, it's there's a huge market too right now in wheelchair users testing VR and other kind of like headset devices, which has been really cool.
I know Meta has something out right now, and I found out about it through the Tech Access group. So, if anyone's interested, I'll put the website up here for them to become testers. But the reality is, there's a lot of movement, and we've talked about it a lot in some of the calls we've had. But technology is always moving, it's always developing, and it's always evolving. But unfortunately, people with disabilities aren't at the forefront of those thoughts. Accessibility options are usually added at the tail end, if they're remembered at all. And I've had devices that only had accessibility options for visual or audio, nothing for mobility. So that's where people like ourselves and others in the field who are striving for digital accessibility and who are working in the field and who are advocating. I know that's a whole nother aspect of the job and our personalities as well and what we're doing. But if we're not advocating or holding these companies accountable, people with disabilities, whatever spectrum you may fall under, are going to be left behind.
Yep. Yeah, something I know I talk about this all the time, but games a lot of times have accessibility features, but they don't advertise it.
Yeah.
So like for me, I wanted the Nintendo Switch fitness boxing game, but looking at the videos of it, you have to do a lot of like turning and like walking and squatting, and so I was like, I can't do that. And I was, I wonder if there's accessibility features, and I go online and it's not on their website, and I start looking around and I can't find any of the info. So I went to Reddit and I went to the Nintendo subreddit and had them I asked the people who had the game to test it for me, and the features were there. You could remove all the leg movements, remove squatting, remove core movements. They had a ton of accessibility features, but it wasn't advertised, so I almost didn't even buy it because I figured I didn't want to buy it if I couldn't use it. And so that's another problem, especially because they're adding those features in at the end. They already have their marketing done by that point. They're not going to add in accessibility as part of their marketing just because they added it at the end. And so that's another thing that needs to be changed is the advertisement. If every, Disney World, when you go to Disney World, you can get an accessibility guide that tells you exactly what features are on each ride. We should have that for games. When games come out, there should be an accessibility guide that tells you exactly what features are available, how to use them, and, where they are in the system. And it needs to be done, and unfortunately I don't think any companies are doing it right now, when it would boost their sales so much if they would just tell us if something was accessible without us having to buy it first.
And those are the 2 points that we've again argued many times. For one, when we're trying to figure out how to use a product, you're either digging through the darkest corners of the internet for someone that has an instructional video, or they don't exist, and you're the one that has to kind of figure it out. And the reality is, especially if you're on disability or if you're getting income checks, you're not willing to spend $300-400 on a product that you most likely won't be able to use, or you feel uncomfortable at the options. So you're not going to. So for those who are trying to maximize the money they're making, it's profitable for them to market better, especially when these options are available at the front end, like we said. But to market them, let them know, because if I don't see someone with a wheelchair at a park, if you're talking about Disney, or going to a restaurant, or wearing your clothes, then odds are it's probably not made for me. And without even trying, I'm gonna skip over that item. So again, across the market, accessibility is very important. And as GAAD, Global Accessibility Awareness Day, comes up on the 19th, I'm gonna put the website in the show notes. Overall, I'll just ask you this question: how important is accessibility as just an overarching theme?
I think accessibility is one of the most important aspects of any field. There are so many fields that, architecture, industrial design, industrial engineering, computing, HCI, human computer interaction, all of those things, accessibility should be at the forefront. And, even if companies, nothing else, money is, disabled people spend money just like everybody else, and we're more likely to buy things that are accessible.
Yeah.
And so if a company doesn't want to make things accessible because it's the right thing to do, then, it's important monetarily as well with your market. But I do think accessibility should be the first thing taught in pretty much every field. Every field is going to use accessibility or encounter accessibility at some point. And so having it be taught in schools as the first, intro class is really important. And having it, workplaces, when they do onboarding, should be providing some at least basic accessibility training as well. So it's so important, and I wish that more people were seeing the importance of it. But I think things like GAAD really get across the message that accessibility is needed and should be a requirement and not something tacked on at the end.
Dope. Madison, I've had you here for a while, but I just want to say, not only are you a wheelchair user, you're a college graduate, you're a dancer, you're an athlete, you make pink hair work, so much more to you, and I think you're an amazing person. So before we go, what advice can you have for other young wheelchair users, or young women going into technology, or just anyone who's open to hearing what you have to say?
I think finding your community is the absolute most important thing you can do, whether you're a woman in tech, or you are a queer person, or you're a wheelchair user. Finding people like you and being able to advocate for yourself because of these groups is extremely important. I think that should be the first thing done, is, finding a community.
All right, dope deal. I know you're on social media. Do you want to share how the people can follow you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at Madison is Queer, all one word. And so connect with me on Instagram.
All right, dope stuff, Madison. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the work you're going to be doing in accessibility. And you already know I'm going to be contacting you once it's time for me to take my test. I'm sure you have some notes I can borrow.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right, dope stuff. You enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, you too.
All right.
Thanks for tuning in to the show. Connect with the podcast on social media. Check out our Instagram page at ramp.it.up.podcast or email us at rampituppodcast@gmail.com. Until next time.